This is my first time doing a multi-location virtual tasting, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Um, as Cameron said, my name is Brian Nation, and I am the master distiller at O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company and master distiller for Keeper's Heart. So just to give you a little bit of background about how I came to being with O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company and to what we actually do and what we stand for. My background is I graduated as a chemical and process engineer, and the last place I thought I'd end up it would be actually making whiskey. But I worked in a pharmaceutical plant, I worked in an oil refinery, and I didn't really enjoy them that much. And an opportunity came for me to join Irish Distillers back in 1997 as an environmental engineer. So I went in, I did that for a year. I then moved into projects, did that for a few years, moved into production then, and slowly but surely worked my way up to effectively becoming master distiller in 2013, where I took over from the then master distiller, Barry Crockett. So his father was master distiller for over 40 years before him, and then he was master distiller for 45 years. So then I joined, and I suppose my expectation, or then I took over, my expectation was I would be master distiller until I retired. But that was before I met the O'Shaughnessy's. So in 2019, one of the O'Shaughnessy founders, Patrick, reached out to me through LinkedIn, which, to be honest with you, I don't really use and I don't really answer. But for some reason, something got me to answer his initial kind of greeting, and I responded, and it was interesting. It reminded me of, when you're starting a date or something like that. He took 4 days to respond to my response. He started playing a bit hard to get. And he basically responded to me saying, can we get on a call eventually? So we got on a call, and, what I expected to be a 20-minute conversation ended up to be an hour and a half on a call, listening to what they were proposing in terms of a new whiskey style and an exciting opportunity within the United States. But for me, it was just really listening and hearing him out. And then he asked if he was in Ireland in the next 3 months, would I meet him for a drink? And I said, of course I would. I'm with Jameson, I'm with Pernod Ricard. I'm not going to be moving to go to the US to be involved in this. But if there's any help I can give you, by all means, I will. Came off the call and was explaining this whole conversation to my wife, who was none impressed, saying, why are you talking to this guy? You have no interest in leaving Irish Distillers. You're married to the job. The distillery sees more of you than we see, all of this type of stuff. And while I was talking to her, a text message came through and it said, I'm going to be in Ireland in 2 days with 2 other founders, my uncle and my cousin. Will you meet us? I was kind of going, Jesus, this is kind of getting serious. In 2 days, he's coming to Ireland. So I then started to tell my wife that, and she was kind of going, now look what you started. They're on their way over thinking you're going to come and join them. And so I was kind of going, look, relax. I'd never said anything like that. But within the next breath, I got a text message from them and say, would you like to bring your wife for dinner with us? So then I had to spend the next 2.5 hours trying to convince her to come and with me to go meet them for dinner. And that was not an easy conversation, but eventually I convinced her to go. So roll forward 2 days later, and we're sitting inside in a restaurant meeting these 3 people that we had never met before. And the conversation and the dinner lasted for 5.5 hours. It was the most unbelievable experience that I think myself and my wife have ever encountered, because you hear this kind of cliched instant connection, all of these, but this actually was a genuine connection. We didn't speak about whiskey during that 5.5 hours. We spoke about family. We spoke about what we wanted for our kids. We just spoke about life in general. And so much so that when we got into the car to leave, now we did at the end of the conversation say, look, we need to have a further conversation about whiskey. And they agreed to come back a few days later and we'd continue the meeting. But when I got into the car to leave, my wife said, if we'd no kids, I'd move to Minneapolis in the morning. I nearly crashed the car, to be quite honest with you, when I heard that, because now it became something that was becoming a potential possibility. So we decided that before we make any other kind of discussions or anything like that, we would decide we would go and visit Minneapolis, because we really didn't know where it was. We didn't know what kind of a city it was. We didn't know anything about the Twin Cities or anything about Minnesota. So we decided in our wisdom to travel on the 1st of January 2020 to see the beautiful place called Minneapolis and St. Paul. So the gods must have been shining down on the O'Shaughnessy's, because for the 4 days we were there, the temperature never went below 37, 38 degrees. There was no snow. It was snow on the ground, but it was, it wasn't a lot. The sun shone every day, and the O'Shaughnessy's kept on telling me, relatively like this all of the time here in Minneapolis during the winter. They fecking well lied, because I can tell you this much, like guys, in the last 3 years, I've gone through 3 winters. I have never in my life witnessed cold or snow or driving conditions like it, to be quite honest with you. So it says a lot for the company, and it says a lot for my passion around whiskey, that I'm still there and have survived driving on the wrong side of the road in loads of snow, in loads of ice, and we're still hanging around. So that's a great sign. So moving forward, we basically made the decision when we were there ourselves that we would actually take the opportunity. It wasn't an easy one. I have 3 kids. I have a 16-year-old girl, a soon to be 14-year-old girl, and a boy who's going to turn 9 in April. So it was a big move for our family, but I really did love the opportunity to be involved in building a brand from the ground up and doing something different. And we'll get on to what we're actually doing at the distillery a little bit in a minute. But, there is something special about what we're doing, because it is new to world. It is new to market style of whiskies. And that's what makes life exciting for me as a distiller, is to be able to be doing something that's different and innovative. So we decided that we would move in July 2020. But we all know what happened between February and March of 2020, when the whole world shut down. So we were it stalled things an awful lot, as you can imagine. And as time was going on, and I was in conversations with the O'Shaughnessy's, and I was going to work at Middleton and coming back in the evenings and talking to the O'Shaughnessy's, there was a moment where I kind of got a little bit of let's just say a little bit more nervous about the move, because the whole world was shutting down and nobody knew what was going to happen. So I remember one evening coming home to my wife and saying, Una, maybe this is a sign. She's going, what's a sign? I said, maybe COVID is a sign that I should stay with Irish Distillers. And she turned around and she said, oh yeah, there's a global pandemic to keep Brian Nation at Irish Distillers. Cop yourself on. You're not that important to anybody. No matter how good you think you are, you're not that important to anybody. And I knew at that moment she was more than 100% behind moving. So I said, that's it, we're definitely going. So I handed in my notice and I left Irish Distillers in July 2020, but couldn't travel to the US until January 2021, and my family didn't move over until August 2021. So it has been a very interesting journey, but actually absolutely thrilled to be there now. And my kids and my wife have really embraced the whole move despite the weather. It's funny now, actually, I'm sitting here at my house with my 2 younger kids, and my wife is in Mexico with my eldest daughter in the sunshine. And, if ever I felt jealous in my life, I feel jealous now, because she comes on the phone, or she comes on FaceTime with a cocktail in her hand, and she's sitting by a pool and all this type of stuff. And here I am going, yeah, it's fecking still freezing here. But anyway, we'll get over those little problems that I have. So what do we do at O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company? What we're doing is we're showcasing the best of Irish and American distilling traditions in 2 kind of ways, really. The first way is the whiskies that you're actually going to taste tonight, where we have actually blended Irish and American whiskey together. So we have sourced Irish whiskey from Great Northern Distillery in Ireland, and we've sourced rye and bourbon from MGP in Indiana, and we brought them to our distillery in Minneapolis, and we've actually done the blending there and blend all of those whiskeys together. So that's the whiskeys you're going to taste tonight. What we're actually doing at the distillery as well since August 2021, and really started laying down whiskey in September 2021, is we're actually distilling in the Irish style of triple copper pot distillation, but we're producing American whiskies. So we're producing an American rye, a triple pot distilled bourbon, and we're also producing an American single pot still. So we're getting the opportunity to effectively Irishize American whiskey and Americanize Irish whiskey. And that in itself is creating, albeit the American whiskeys that we're distilling at our distillery will be a bourbon and a rye, they will taste different. They will have a different taste profile simply because of the distillation process that they're going through. So that's really exciting as we see them maturing in the warehouses at the moment, to actually see the impact that that distillate is having with the virgin oak is really, really interesting to see the development, and we're really excited about that. You won't see those brands come to market, or Keeper's Heart pots, American single pot still, or triple pot distill rye, or triple pot distill bourbon. You'll start seeing them come to market in September 2024, September 2025, and September 2026. That's the plan at the moment. But it also depends on how well they mature and how well they continue to mature. If we're not happy that it's too early to release them, we will hold off. And we have the luxury of being able to do that because of the success of the brands and the blends of whiskey that you're actually going to taste there tonight. Any questions? And if you have, I don't know how it's going to work with the virtual, but if you do have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or whatever, and I'll do my best to answer them as we go through it. Cameron, I think you're going to say something.
Yeah, they'll funnel me the questions, Brian, and I'll get them to you as they come. Okay.
Perfect. That's great. That's brilliant. So, guys, let's kick off with the first whiskey, which is Keeper's Heart Irish Plus American. I assume we're going from left to right. So this whiskey was the first of the blends we put together. What was interesting about this one was this was initially blended in Ireland. And if for those of you who have tried to send American whiskey to Ireland, it is absolutely the most difficult thing to do in your life. You might as well be importing cocaine or something like that, because not that I've ever done that, but it seems so difficult. Every time we started importing the American whiskey, it was being stopped. And the same for me, sending prototypes across to the US. So we started importing olive oil into Ireland. And Jesus, they must have thought I was building this most amazing Italian restaurant, because I was getting so much olive oil delivered to my house. But thankfully, we were able to get it in to start doing some of the blends. And we must have started with between 130 and 140 different prototypes, basically to try and get that correct balance. Because at the time we were looking at malt whiskey, pot still whiskey, grain whiskey. On the Irish side, we were then looking at Tennessee whiskey, bourbon, and rye on the American side, and really trying to get the perfect balance between all three, and ensuring that we had the right style of American whiskey. And what I mean by that is that we wanted to make sure, obviously, that the quality was of paramount importance, but also that you had continuity of supply and that you had repeatability from the distillery itself. And I'd be totally honest, I initially decided that I didn't want to use MGP. But there's a reason lots of distilleries use MGP, and that is down to quality, repeatability, and also supply. So, it was great. I remember tasting the MGP rye that's in the whiskey that you're going to taste now later on for the first time. And it really just blew me away because of the vibrance of that 95.5 rye, the amount of flavor, the amount of characteristic that's in it. So as we whittled down the blends from 130 to 140 down to about maybe 25, it was all being done with Irish palates, because I couldn't travel to the US. And I was kind of concerned, because I was saying, okay, we've got all of these experienced people tasting the whiskey here in Ireland, but what about an American palate? What if that is different to what we're looking at? That could be a problem, particularly because this was going to be our first market we launch in. We have ambition that it will be a global brand, but ultimately it's going to be in the US where it will be successful. So by January 2021, I was able to travel to America, and I was able to get the prototypes over. And at that stage, David Perkins, the founder of High West, had come on board as an investor in the business, but also a liquid collaborator. I knew David for probably 10 to 15 years before that, because when I was working for Irish Distillers and Pernod Ricard were potentially looking at acquiring High West, he came to the distillery and I met him, and we built a kind of a relationship that we kept in contact for years. When he heard I'd come on board here, we had a phone call and he said, I've unfinished business in the whiskey industry. And I said, well, are you interested in coming on board? He said, I'd love to. So basically he came on board, and it was great to have the likes of David from an American whiskey point of view, because if you consider David was probably one of the mavericks of American whiskey. He was the guy that drove a lot of innovation. He drove, blending bourbon and rye together. He blended American whiskey and Scotch whiskey together. I do joke with him and say, thanks be to Jesus you never thought of blending Irish and American, because I wouldn't be sitting here in the US now doing it. But he was the type of guy that was really into the innovation. So that was something that was very important to me as well. So basically we went through the rest of the prototypes, and we came down to 2 prototypes. And we brought the 2 prototypes to a group meeting, and all of the team members at the time in April of 2021, April 2021, came together, and we decided on which was the final blend. And that was great, because it gave everybody that feeling of ownership and that feeling of involvement within the whole process. And I thought that was very special for us and for the team at Keeper's Heart. So just as we talk about the whiskey, take it in your hand, and basically this whiskey is a blend of Irish pot still, Irish grain whiskey, and American rye. And as you nose it, for me, what I initially get is I get a lovely kick of rice spice. That kick of rice spice is coming from the rye itself, obviously, but then you're getting a lot of herbal earthy notes coming through, which is coming from the pot distillate itself. And the pot distillate is very distillate driven, and it allows you to get some of the orchard fruits that you get in a pot still. But for me, they're cooked fruits, they're cooked apples, cooked pears. And then you also have a nice little barley cereal note in the background. When you taste the whiskey, you get this extra dimension of taste and flavor. You're getting what I describe as the creaminess of the pot still, coupled with the syrupiness of the rye, giving you this extra dimension of mouthfeel. There's a lot going on in the palate. It's almost like the tropical fruits from the rye, which typically for me are peaches and melons, are coupled with the cooked orchard fruits of apples and pears. And they're almost covered in a layer of baking spices that gives this extra dimension of confectionery sweetness, almost like candied ginger. And as I'm talking, that still lingers. And as those spices and fruits slowly begin to fade, you're left with some beautiful subtlety of charred oak, but also that nice barley cereal note coming from the pot still whiskey as well. So you've got that combination of charred oak from the rye coupled with the barley cereal note from the pot still. For those of you who don't know the difference between, we'll say, a grain whiskey, a pot still, and a rye, I'll just quickly describe. When we talk about Irish grain whiskey, we're talking about grain whiskey that's made using a mash bill of predominantly corn. It's typically 90 to 95% corn, and the rest is malted barley. That's distilled 3 times on column stills. And it comes off the 3rd column still at about 188 proof. So that's very high strength, almost close to neutral. By doing that, you're taking away a lot of flavor, a lot of congeners, but you're leaving a nice butterscotch caramel note. And that follows through on the whiskey as well. When it's matured in refill barrels then for 4 years, the refill barrels don't tend to give a lot of wood. They tend to give more of that vanilla sweetness. And that complements very much so the grain whiskey element, or the grain distillate, to give you a very delicate, sweet whiskey in terms of the grain whiskey. Pot still whiskey, by comparison, pot still whiskey has a lot more flavor. It is a mash bill of malted barley and unmalted barley. It's distilled 3 times on the pot stills, but it actually only comes off the 3rd pot still at about 168 proof. That drop of 20 proof actually allows it to capture more flavor. So therefore, when you nose a pot still whiskey on its own, you tend to get more of that herbal earthiness. You tend to get more of that cooked orchard fruits. And again, you don't get a lot of wood because it's matured in refill barrels. Comparison that to the rye, then, where the rye has a lot more vibrance, it has a lot more spice. That's basically a 95-5 mash bill, so 95% rye, 5% malted barley. That's a typical mash bill from MGP. It's distilled between a column and a doubler, and basically you're getting a nice rich character with that spice of cloves, cinnamon, cardamom, even hints of dill. And then you've got that backbone of charred oak along with the tropical fruits. So you have three very, very different whiskies coming together. And for me, it showcases a number of different things. It showcases that Irish and American whiskey can stand up together. They actually are complementary of each other. But what was interesting during the blending was that when I tried to blend a pot still and a rye together, I couldn't get them to coexist. It actually only came together properly and with a proper balance and complexity was by introducing a small amount of grain whiskey. And that was a big learning curve for me when I was putting the blends together in the first place. Any questions? Yeah, okay. So now the second whiskey you're going to taste is the Keeper's Heart Irish Plus Bourbon. Now, the Keeper's Heart Irish Plus American was 86 proof. This is actually 92 proof. It's also more bourbon forward. And one way of looking at these two whiskies is that we see the Keeper's Heart Irish Plus American as almost like a gateway for Irish whiskey drinkers towards American whiskey. And we see the Irish Plus Bourbon as a gateway for American whiskey drinkers towards Irish. Because when you're dealing with trying to convert American whiskey drinkers, particularly bourbon whiskey drinkers, away from bourbon, they're very, very slow to do that. But if you have that bourbon influence and then have it almost tricking them into having the pot still in it, they begin to appreciate it. And we actually saw that a lot when we launched the Keeper's Heart Irish Plus Bourbon at our distillery. We had a lot of bourbon influencers coming to the distillery, and some of them would have been, I suppose, a little bit suspect about, is this really going to work? And their reaction during and after the release was really, really great for us to see, because, you know, you were going to get an honest opinion, and we want an honest opinion, and it was great to see that reaction. So when you start with the Irish Plus Bourbon, just take a nose of it. You immediately get that bourbon forward nose. You've got that typical, what I describe as that corn sweetness. You've got a nice lot of caramel going on. You've got a lot of charred oak, and you've even got that that even pepperiness that comes from the bourbon. If you leave this sit in your glass a little bit longer, you'll actually begin to get more of the pot still beginning to emanate as well for it as it heats up in the glass. But now taste it. When you taste this whiskey, you've got a lot of that bourbon character. You've got the pepperiness from the bourbon. The bourbon mash bill that we use is actually 21% rye in it. And the inclusion of that little bit of rye actually adds to the pepperiness with a little bit more spice. But what I find interesting about this whiskey is that as the bourbon begins to take hold on the front end, in mid-palate, the pot still herbal earthiness begins to follow through. And it's almost like that combination of corn sweetness and herbal earthiness drags the finish out even longer, and it lingers for quite a long time. And when it does begin to fade, you're actually left with that beautiful, again, some charred oak. But now for me, I've got a little bit more of kind of caramel vanilla sweetness in the background, and then I'm also getting that herbal, or that barley cereal note towards the finish as well. I think what's important for us as well is that, you know, when we were putting these whiskeys together, we kind of gave ourselves three objectives. Number one was to create a great tasting whiskey, which is a bit of a no-brainer. If you're not going to start there, you might as well give up. The second one was to ensure that any of the components that we put together actually are used in the blend actually played a part in delivering on the overall flavor. So even when you have a small amount of grain whiskey in there, you actually do detect that butterscotch caramel note in the whiskey. And it's great to see that it is playing a part, that it's not a filler for the sake of being a filler. And then thirdly is versatility. And those of you who are, whiskey drinkers for a long time, basically you'll see how much the landscape has changed. The landscape has changed dramatically in terms of the way people enjoy whiskey nowadays compared to 15 years ago. Gone is the day where people only drink their whiskey neat or on the rocks. They now like to enjoy it in long drinks and cocktails. They like to experiment more with it. And for us to be a successful brand nowadays, it needs to be able to play in all of those spaces. So it needs to be nice, drunk neat, on the rocks, or in cocktails. And one of the reasons and advantages of having higher proof as well is that still making sure that the whiskey is the hero of the cocktail. Too many times a cocktail can be made that will actually mask all of the whiskey flavors, and it's more the syrup and more of the bitters that take over. Whereas what we're trying to showcase here is the hero of the cocktail should still be the whiskey. And I assure you, if you do an old-fashioned with Keeper's Heart Irish plus American, or you do a Manhattan with Keeper's Heart Irish plus bourbon, you really will get those fantastic whiskey flavors really shining through in the actual cocktail itself. Any questions? There's an exam at the end, you know that?
You're explaining it all so well, Brian. I don't.
Oh yeah. So the third whiskey that we're going to taste now is a 10-year-old single malt. So that single malt is whiskey that we procured from Cooley Distillery. So it's an old Cooley Distillery distilled whiskey. And basically, we took that and I finished it for between 4 and 5 months in Malaga wine barrels. And the reason I did this is because for me, sometimes a single malt can be quite dry in the palate. It has fantastic flavor. It has fantastic impact, but sometimes it can be quite dry. And if you compare it to a pot still, which is that blend of malted barley and unmalted barley, it does the pot still tends to be more creamy. So for me, with the single malt, what I wanted to do was bring a little bit more texture on the mouthfeel and enhance the flavor a little bit with some of that Malaga wine influence. So for those of you who don't know, Malaga wine is a dessert wine that is made in Spain in the Malaga region. It's actually where they sun dry the grapes to really get that concentrated sweetness. And then they finish it or they mature it in virgin oak barrels. So we took those barrels and we finished our whiskey in it for that 4 to 5 month period. What it did bring was it brought a nice honey sweetness, apricot stone fruit, and some almond nutty flavors to the whiskey. So take up your glass again and just try to nose the whiskey. It's got all the beautiful characteristics of that malt. So you've got lovely biscuit cereal flavors. You've got some nice fruitiness, but you also now have some honey sweetness. You also have some almond nutty flavors coming through, and that little apricot stone fruit. Now try a taste. Do you get that texture from the honey, that honey sweetness? It brings a little bit more of a mouthfeel to the whiskey, while still keeping the 10-year-old single malt characteristics to the fore. I really like the influence that the Malaga wine has brought to that whiskey, to be honest with you. Any questions or comments? No? Okay. Can you still hear me? Okay. All right. Oh, we could have a question.
We can also hear you. Well, one question for you, Brian. Why choose those specific wine casts? I say it again. What was the name of the wine cast?
Malaga wine. Okay, so there's a couple of reasons I chose that actually. There's one selfish reason is because I love Malaga wine. and I love the influence that Malaga wine actually has on a whiskey. And one of the whiskies that I would have been involved with in Irish Distillers would have been Yellow Spot. And Yellow Spot has actually whiskey that's been matured for 12 years in Malaga wine barrels. And I just feel the influence that that whiskey has is unbelievable, or that barrel has on the whiskey is unbelievable. So that's one reason. The other reason is that there's actually a bit of the story of my decision to move, or our decision to move to Minneapolis is involved with Malaga, because when we came back from Minneapolis in January of 2020, we decided that we needed to go away to a little bit of a warmer place to have a discussion about whether we would finally make the move or not. And me being an engineer, I thought this was, a meeting more or less, with going away with my wife. And basically I brought my notebook with all my pros and cons of why we should go, why we shouldn't go. And we came to this place. If for those of you who have been to Malaga, or if you ever get the chance to go to Malaga in Spain, go to a place called El Pimpi. It's a tapas bar, and it has this beautiful terrace where you can sit out and enjoy some lovely Malaga wine in the sun. So we were doing that, sitting out. So I brought out my notebook, and I had my notebook, and I said, we better discuss whether we're going to move or not. And my wife said, what are you doing with the notebook? I said, I've all the pros and cons. She goes, feck that, she said, we're going, and that's it. So the notebook was literally thrown away. And I said, fair enough. And we just spent the rest of the weekend drinking Malaga wine. It was fantastic. So that ties in a bit to the story as well of what we did.
So is it F-E-C-K? Is that how you pronounce?
Oh, feck, yeah. F-E-C-K, yeah. You see, you're allowed to say feck. You can't say the other one.
I got another question for you, Brian. So you said originally that it was not MGP that you guys sourced from. So what distillery, to get this off the ground, did you guys source this from?
We actually sourced from a number of different distilleries that I suppose we did it through a broker. And initially what we were looking at, we didn't specifically go out and look at any one particular distillery. We just went looking at distillates that were available on the market for us to be able to purchase. So when we went on that process of doing that, what we were finding was that any whiskies that we were potentially interested in, they weren't readily available, and they weren't available in the quantities we were looking for, and there was no guarantee of repeatability and no guarantee of continuous supply. So we quickly pivoted towards MGP because of that. So I'm not going to get into the names of the distillery, not because I don't want people to think that I thought their whiskey was terrible or anything like that. It was just that it became very, very clear to us that some of the whiskeys that we would have, been interested in would not have been able to give us the supply and demand that we needed.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's everything for right now.
No bother. Okay. So now we move on to the moment of truth with the single barrel, the Gomer single barrel. So this is part of a program that we developed at the distillery, which is a single barrel program, where what we want to do is we want to give liquor stores, or even bars, if they wanted, the opportunity to purchase their own relatively personalized single barrel of whiskey. And really what we're doing there is we want to keep the DNA of Keeper's Heart alive, but we want to enhance it with some different style of finishing barrels. So we've done everything from virgin American oak, refill rye, maple syrup, stout barrels. We've been using some wine barrels like Cab Sav, Sauternes, Sherry, Madeira. We actually haven't done Malaga yet with our Keeper's Heart Irish plus our Keeper's Heart Irish plus American, and we haven't done Marsala yet, but I'm trying to source these barrels at the moment. And we're also looking at some other unusual barrels that we keep quiet at the moment until we see they're working, and then we say they're brilliant. But so there's a lot of work goes on in putting these different types of single barrels together. And then we gave Gomers were good enough to be interested in being involved in the single barrel program, and they had an opportunity to choose different types of barrels. And in the end, they chose basically a stout barrel finish. And for me, it has fantastic flavor and fantastic quality. So what we do is we take Keeper's Heart Irish plus American at cask strength, and we finish it in whatever barrels that somebody wants, and we leave it there for the length of time that they want, and for for basically the influence that people are looking for. The stout that with the particular barrel that we're talking about here is, first of all, it's at 110 proof, which is as you taste it, for me, I think it's actually a dangerous 110 proof, because you don't realize you're drinking 110. Secondly, what I love about the stout barrels that we're using is that they come directly from Surly Brewing, which is right next door to us. And Surly Brewing are famous for their darkness in Imperial, Russian Imperial Stout. And the flavors that stout provides to the whiskey is phenomenal. And particularly we're lucky that we get such a great contribution, because they're literally rolled over to us from the brewery itself. So there's no time wasted in having these barrels dry out or anything like that. We're filling them straight away, and you begin to see an influence very, very quickly on the whiskey. As it sits longer in the barrel, what you do find is that the balance between the whiskey and the stout begins to become a little bit more complex, and it becomes a little bit more balanced. And I think the one that Gomer's chose really showcases that. So if you take your glass up, you'll notice now that the whiskey is much darker. If I show you this one, is it my darkness one? Probably not as good in this one. Probably you don't really see it in that, because the bottle is half empty, as you can see. But you'll find that you've got a much darker color. Not because I drank it; it's just it disappears out of the bottle. But as you nose it, you begin to get some of the stout characteristic. And for me, you're getting a lot of that coffee, that chocolate. You're getting some roasted barley, but you're also getting almost like a denser nature within the whiskey itself. It tends to become a heavier style of whiskey in a good way. So when you taste it at the 110, the mouthfeel for me has become more creamy. There's a lot more of that creaminess from the stout coming to the mouthfeel. And there's a lot going on in the palate. You've got the roasted barley, you've got the chocolate, you've got the spice from the rye, you've got so much going on, and it just keeps on going. And then as you begin to see a subtle finish, the finish is more of that roasted barley, more of that that charred oak, and nice coffee little characteristics in the background. If you add a drop of water to it as well, you'll see the whiskey will actually open up even more. And for me, what happens here is that some of the whiskey characteristic begins to kick through a little bit more, and also some of that coffee note is a little bit more prevalent as well. But I think you'll agree that it's actually it's very easy to drink at 110 proof. And I've tasted lots of 110 proof in my day, and some of them are quite robust and burning, whereas this is actually not. The beauty about it as well is that it actually works extremely well in the cocktails, and particularly an old fashioned is something that really works extremely well in. Any questions?
We had here in Midtown was is the Surly Stout barrel finish something that you guys have done on the American bourbon as well as the rye?
We actually we haven't made anything that's finished on the bourbon available yet. That's not to say we won't, but we're actually focusing on the Keeper's Heart Irish plus American finishing. We might do some specials at some point, which will be bourbon, but they will be very, very limited in their release for the time being anyway. But yeah, we do like, let's just say we are playing around with the bourbon as well.
Question for you is, other than the gorgeous weather of Twin Cities, what is your favorite part of being an American now?
What is my favorite part? I think my favorite part about it is actually, first of all, is seeing how well, first of all, how well we've been welcomed into America and into the community. To be quite honest with you, we couldn't have hoped for a better welcoming from people that we never met before in our lives in the areas we were living in and everything like that. And it wasn't just because I was giving everybody a bottle of whiskey. Let's just make that clear, right? They didn't, probably some of them didn't even know I made whiskey. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it. But what I'm loving most about it as well is the fact to see how my kids are thriving in the new kind of world that they're living in a different type of culture, making great friends, really embracing the move, and really feeling that, you know, they're in a place that they like and that they would potentially stay in. My eldest daughter has said, you know, Dad, I don't think I'll ever go back to Ireland. I love this place. I'm really, really enjoying it. That's good to hear in one sense. It's hard to hear in another sense because, you know, do I see myself spending the rest of my life in America? I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think that I would travel between Ireland and America. Certainly won't be spending all my winters in Minneapolis. I can tell you that for nothing. I definitely won't be doing that. As soon as I can spend 3 months or 4 months of winter away from Minneapolis, I'll be doing that. I love come back in the summer because it's a beautiful place in the summer. But I just love the fact that my kids have adapted so well and people have been so welcoming and have really embraced us and we've embraced the change.
Question from 103rd was, so back to the Gomer's barrels. So were those Surly barrels wet when they were actually filled, since they're right next door? Were they legit?
Absolutely. That's the beauty about doing the finishing barrels, is the fresher the barrel, obviously, the better the impact. And we're finding that because we're so close by Surly, getting those barrels across and having that residue, that wet residue there, you're getting an influence very, very quickly. It can be a bit of a pain in the arse at times because you're trying to filter out any residue as well then when you're getting the bottling. So sometimes you can come across bottles that are cloudy, simply because even though we've gone through a proper filtration process, there's still a little bit of stout residue there that gets through. And that can be seen to be a negative. I actually think it's quite a nice positive to think that there's that much of an influence in there. But some people would look at that as being, you know, it doesn't look great on a shelf, which you can understand that too.
Next question would be, can you tell us again the mash bill of each one of these products?
Yeah, so for Keeper's Heart Irish plus American, the mash bill is, well, the components are Irish grain whiskey, Irish pot still whiskey, and American rye whiskey. The mash bill of the grain whiskey is 95% corn, 5% malted barley. The mash bill of the pot still whiskey is 50% malted barley, 50% unmalted barley. And then the mash bill of the rye is 95% rye, 5% malted barley. Then for the Keeper's Heart Irish plus bourbon, the mash bill is grain whiskey, pot still, and bourbon. Same mash bill for the pot still and the grain whiskey. And then the bourbon mash bill is 21% rye, 75% corn, and 4% malted barley. And then the 10-year-old single malt is 100% malted barley. And then the Keeper's Heart single barrel, the stout barrel for yourselves, is the same mash bill as the Keeper's Heart Irish plus American.
Any other Surly beers for cast finish on any private barrels?
We haven't done anything else with them yet, but a couple of things I want to do is actually do take some more of their beers over to do some finishing, but I also want to do I'd love to take some of their beers and distill them and see how they work out, because it's an opportunity that you have here that you didn't have in Ireland, that I didn't have in Ireland. If you took wash from another brewery into the distillery, you couldn't call it whiskey. You had to call it spirit. You couldn't distill it and call it whiskey. Whereas here, you can actually do that and call it whiskey. And there's some fantastic characters can be taken, and flavors can be produced from distilling a beer. So that's something that I'm interested in doing, albeit on a small scale, but would like to do something special in that.
Is another question pertaining to the collaborations. Do you foresee it being a possibility to collaborate with any Irish breweries, any Irish beers with your specific products?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with it is going to be the freshness of the barrels, getting them over here. Yeah. There's no problem. I mean, I can think of a number of breweries already that we could do collaborations with. But what we're trying to make sure is that when we do something, or if we do something, that the actual the freshness of the barrel doesn't, or that the barrel itself stays fresh enough to be positive in the finish. I'm in Ireland next week, and I will be chatting to somebody about that. So it's an interesting question to come up.
Is another question about Surly, the relationship with Surly. Are they using any of your whiskey barrels to barrel age any of their beer?
Yeah, so they took not so much our self-distilled barrels, but our barrels from our rye and bourbon that we get from MGP. We gave them some of them to do some barley wines that they were producing, and they released their first release from it a few weeks ago, actually. And they produced a lovely barley wine that was finished in a combination, I think, of the rye and the bourbon barrels that we got from MGP. But none of our whiskey has come out of barrels yet to give them. But that's the plan, is that they will take those barrels when we're ready to give them to them.
Very cool. Gentleman here was wondering, so are these products, are these considered gluten-free? Or since they're distillates, or since they're made from grain, still do they contain?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, because you get asked it every now and then. In my understanding, and this is my understanding, gluten doesn't distill across. So from that point of view, they're gluten free. I stand to be corrected on that, but as far as I'm concerned, if anybody asked me were they gluten-free, I would say, yeah, they're gluten-free, because I don't believe gluten can actually distill across from a distillate. But I could stand to be corrected on
that. What is the proof on the 10-year again, Brian?
The proof on the 10-year is 86.
110, correct, yes. Question over here. I was kind of saving this question for last, and I'm sure there's no bias here at all, but what is your favorite Irish whiskey of all time?
Powers John's Lane 12-year-old, without a shadow of a doubt.
One more time.
Powers John's Lane 12-year-old, without a shadow of a doubt.
Powers John's Lane 12-year-old. Yes. We have many people concurring with you.
Oh, it's an amazing whiskey. I mean, like, my name has been on Middleton Very Rare from 2014 to 2020, and I'm very proud of those whiskies, and I love those whiskies. But Powers John's Lane 12-year-old is just an amazing single pot still that really does showcase the quality of the distillate over the barrel, and it really is. It's an amazing whiskey.
The folks up in Parkville want you to know that to ship the feckin' barrels of beer, Parkville will help drink it. Send them
Too late, guys. We drank them all already. So tough.
Okay. Another couple of questions from Parkville. Do you sell the cloudy bottles at a discount? And also, are there tours available in the operations up in Minnesota?
Well, first of all, the cloudy bottles are an actual collector's item, so no. And secondly, there are tours at the distillery, yeah. So we basically do tours from Tuesday to Sunday. It's a great look, to be honest with you. If you get the opportunity to come and visit, it's well worth doing. It's 30,000 square feet, 15,000 square feet of distilling operations, and of which the tour you'll be brought through all of that. And then we have 15,000 square feet of hospitality, where we have a cocktail bar, where we've got a beautiful lounge area, mezz. We also do some fantastic food. And then in the summer, we have an outdoor container bar as well that serves completely different cocktails that are really, really fit for the summer weather.
Thank you, Brian. I've got another question here. Sorry, you said the United States was your first market, obviously the priority here. Are you guys in all 50 states already, or what's the...
So for a year one brand, we've been the most awarded new whiskey of 2022, which is something that we're very, very proud of. We've also reached 18 states with our whiskey for the first year as well, which is quite an achievement. And then when you bring in something like reserve bars or things like that, we're actually reachable in 35 states. So our plan this year actually is to hold on the 18 states, because we want to make sure that we're a mile deep in each of those states as well, rather than spreading ourselves too thinly before we can go into other states. So the plan is that for 2023, we'll probably stay with the 18 states. And then in 24, 25, we'll expand out further. We are actually launching in Ireland in 2 weeks' time. And that's something that I'm really excited about, because we're going to have a bit of fun there. And it's going to be great to see the reaction when we come back and start convincing people to taste our whiskey. The reaction so far, due to the small little trials that have found their way into bars across Ireland, has been very, very positive.
It looks like my laptop's about to die, but I've got a couple more questions for you that we'll try and squeeze here. First one is, what is your guys' number one selling product? And then the other one is, how close are you guys to anything older than a 10-year?
So
our
biggest selling product is Keeper's Heart Irish Plus American, but that's because it's been longest on the market as well. We are seeing a big uptake in the Irish Plus bourbon since we released it, but that was released probably about 6 months later than the Irish Plus American was released. But at the moment, you're seeing the Irish Plus American. Then in relation to, are we any closer to doing anything older than a 10-year-old? Yeah, we have some special whiskies that we're going to release later in this year that will be a lot older and will have some interesting finish as well, which is something that we're really looking forward to.
As far as aging the whiskey up in Minnesota, it is, I mean, I'm sure you guys have brick houses, but is the climate affected? Have you seen any effect as far as the swings in climate up there being so cold?
Well, to be honest with you, what we're doing with the majority of our barrels is we're actually maturing them in a heated warehouse to make sure that we're having a consistent temperature. We are going to put we do have a few that are in a warehouse without heat temperature, just to see how they're actually reacting to the maturation as well, just to see how different they will be, if at all.
Very good. Very good. I don't have anything else as far as questions for you, Brian. I really appreciate you. This has been so insightful. Always tasting alongside a master distiller is very educational, and like I said, just insightful on all the process and beautiful things that you guys do with whiskey. So thank you.
Appreciate that, Cameron. Thanks a lot. I mean, look, it's great to get the opportunity to taste to so many people from one location as well, with 3 different locations. So I hope that the technology worked for people and that you enjoy the tasting, and more importantly, that you enjoy the whiskey. And if you do, just go out and buy a bottle and tell all your friends. And when you go to a bar, look for it. And if they don't have it, ask why, and tell them you need to get it in.
Sure, we can. Thank you.
Thanks a million, guys. Take care of
Take
yourselves.
care.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Cheers.